So we want to solve this equation on the interval from 0 to 2 pi. 2 cosine squared theta minus cosine of theta equals 0. So we don't really know how to treat this cosine squared. We don't know values of cosine squared. We can't combine these because they're not like terms. So what are our options? I'm going to treat this as if I was trying to solve a normal algebraic equation, and I'm going to factor. So I'm going to factor out a cosine of theta. So if I factor out a cosine of theta, I get cosine of theta times 2 cosine of theta minus 1 equals 0. And then we can use the zero product property, which says that if either factor is equal to 0, then the whole thing is equal to 0. So we can just split these apart and say the cosine of theta is 0, and then 2 cosine of theta minus 1 equals 0. And that'll give us values that we can then use to solve, right? So if I solve this a little bit more, try and solve for the cosine, I can add 1 to cosine of theta equals 1, divide by 2, and so I have the cosine of theta equals 1/2. So now what I'm going to try and do is figure out on the values, on the interval from 0 to 2 pi, where is the cosine 0 and where is the cosine 1/2? Well, I know that the cosine is going to be 0, right? So if I take the inverse, so theta equals the inverse cosine of 0. Now again, this is kind of loose interpretation of inverse cosine being 0 because we're not restricted to the first and second quadrants. Rather, we're restricted to between 0 and 2 pi. So we know that theta is going to be, to make the cosine 0 at pi over 2 and at 3 pi over 2. So if we took the inverse cosine here, we'd get theta equals the inverse cosine of 1/2. Again, loose interpretation of this. This is basically just saying where is the cosine 1/2 on this interval. Well, the cosine is going to be positive 1/2 for values of theta equaling pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3 in the fourth quadrant. So these are all of our angle measures that make this true. So our solution is going to be all of these. So pi over 3, pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, and then 5 pi. Oh, that's supposed to be 5 pi over 3. Sorry. This is 5 pi over 3. 5 pi over 3. So those are all the values that are solutions to this equation.